welcome everybody to our 8th online UX beer. For those who don't know me, my name is Peter, and I will guide you through this event. Also, I would like to introduce my coworkers, Patricia from ITVOLI.
Hi.
And Ljubica from UX Košice and Slovak User Experience Association.
Hi.
And just to really couple of words at the beginning, I would like to really thank to our partners, ITVOLI and Slovak User Experience Associations, and also media partners like Indexmark and Košice Go, and thank you for the support. Couple of organization notes. During the talk, you can ask any questions via our Zoom chat, and Felix, our guest, will answer your questions after his talk, or you can ask him directly once he finishes his talk. And this event will be being recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channel shortly after the event. So okay, let's start. So today we have a special guest from Germany, and I'm honored to welcome my friend and former colleague as well, great and passionate designer and human factors engineer, Felix Noller, currently based in Berlin. He's a co-founder of Aumio. His focus is on empowering children and families lead healthy and happy and self-determined life, and also designing for children's rights, which is an international activist or association. So hope everybody will enjoy this talk. And so let's begin. So Felix, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for this kind introduction. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm going to share my screen now and start a presentation. Can you see it all? Perfect. Nice. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity talking about children's rights in design today. As Peter said, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. There's enough time, I think, in the end to answer them. Maybe quickly about myself. Already mentioned, my name is Felix. I am the co-founder of Aumio, which is a mental health app for children. I'm going to talk more about it a bit later in the talk. I am there as a user researcher and designer, which is my main activity. And I'm also an active and a first member of Designing for Children's Rights, an international association that's working towards bringing children's rights into the design process. And this talk today is going to be about children's rights in the design process. It's about and to start with, if you're like me, and I know most of you are UX designers, if you're like me, you may have come across a question like this. How can I make sure that my product or what I'm designing is responsible, it can be used by everyone, it's inclusive, secure, and respects the user's privacy, it enables the user, it is not of any danger, and considers social and moral standards. In other words, if we put that all together, how can I make sure that my product is designed ethically and in a way that it's following moral standards? And I'd like to, I can't give you the ultimate question, I guess nobody really can, but I'd like to go into this topic by asking if you want to start with a user group that has really high standards, because if you fulfill those standards, those moral and ethical standards, then ultimately you design something for everyone, and you design something that others can use too. And therefore, I'd like to ask you in the beginning to sit back and think a little about a child that's born today. So what does the world to a child, to a person who's born today, how does the world look like in which this child grows up? How will the child connect? How will it learn? how it interacts with their family and their friends, and what does a typical day in the life of this child will look like. And then maybe if you think a bit further, let's say we thought about Emma as a child being born today. In 2030, she's going to be 9 years old. And if you consider the world that she grows up in, it will be a world where she's more connected than ever before to other people. She's connected globally, and terms like virtual or augmented reality or artificial intelligence or machine learning, they will all be part of the everyday life and the everyday conversation. And Emma will use digital products and services every day, even at 9 years old. And she will be empowered by these services and by this technology. We see that already today. There's a lot of examples where children and teenagers around the globe are in an everyday life. So I guess everybody knows Greta Thunberg. She's the activist who is responsible for Fridays for Future and for recognizing environmental impacts more than ever before. And she used the internet to connect and to spread her message. The same goes as a second example for Malala, the second person on this page. She's an activist for children and women's rights. And she actually started to write a blog on her everyday life under the Taliban rule at the age of 11. And she shared her knowledge with the whole world by using the technology that was available to her. There's more examples. There's one more example of Czech on the very right. For free to develop a way of diagnose and find a certain kind of cancer at the age of 15. So we see the technologies and the products that we use, they not just enable us in our everyday work, but they enable every generation, they enable children and teenagers to do what we, when we were younger, maybe could not have done. But with all this power and all these opportunities, there's also dangers that come with it. So we know that all the devices and the technology we use, they're more personal than ever. They're also very private. Children can use smartphones by themselves. They can use it when they are by themselves, which leaves them also less supervised when they're online. There's a lot of dangers that come out of that. While it's which is more vulnerable regarding trust, also regarding resilience, and more vulnerable to dark patterns that they see every day on the internet. Dark patterns meaning something, for example, that can make you like addictive mechanisms or advertisement mechanisms. And even though almost all children online view, like a lot of children have positive experiences and see the opportunities in what they see, many worry that the immersion in screens make children more depressed or create internet dependencies, or sometimes even contribute to obesity or other effects. Another example is data. We all know that our data is being misused, but we also see children using the same services, the same products as we do, so their data is also misused in the same way that our data is misused. And that's just something to consider when we look at the internet population, that it's not just us that uses our products and services, it's also other generations like children. In fact, actually, children make up 1/3 of all internet users globally. And yet hardly they are recognized as such, as like this big user group online. And maybe one reason is that children, they don't own the money, they don't have the credit cards. Maybe it's because companies and services don't see the value in designing for children because there's no financial value on the first site. But yeah, so ultimately it's a huge group, vulnerable. It needs to be considered when we talk about everyday products and services. So it's important to make them visible. it's important to stand in for their rights, to make them heard. And it's important to give them the opportunities that the internet provides for everyone. How to do that? There is actually great guidance already out there. The most famous one and most specific one, of course, is the Convention on the Rights of the Child by the United Nations. It's decades old, and they did lots of really good work in advocating children's rights. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's actually ratified by almost every country in the world. And it pretty much helps identify children's special needs and children's rights in 4 bigger areas, which is the survival rights that ensures that most basic needs, such as adequate standards of living, shelter, nutrition, primary health care, and so forth. Then there's the development rights that it describes, which means the rights that children require to reach their fullest potential, which is, for example, education, play, and leisure. And then there's the protection rights that are necessary for safeguarding children against all forms of abuse, of violence, and of exploitation. And then there's a really big one, which is the participation rights, the rights to participate, that allow children to take regarding freedom to express their opinions, or to have a say in matters that affect their lives, and join associations, for example. The Convention on the Rights of the Child has quite a few articles. For example, you just see a few. Number 1, which defines like what a child, like the definition of a child, what actually means. Number 8, just to give an example, is about identity. Number 14, about freedom of thought and religion. And so there's multiple of those children's rights articles. They are the children's rights by the UN is a form of communicating and guiding if you are in the area of children's rights, or if you're not, it's for any kind of person. But it should provide guidance. Now, the tricky part is that if you work in design, or if you don't work with children, you have very little connection with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. They are written down in words that are really easy to understand, yet they are not there where you may find them if you're not looking for them. And they may not be written in a language that helps you support your work or helps you in your work. So it's actually the way it's written down, but also the perspective you look at it is something that matters. And we hear that one of the major rights for children is rights and participation. It's also their right and participation to make those children's rights matter. Comic here that just highlights how important it is to actually integrate children and children's rights in the process, and integrate children's participation in the process, because the perspective is what matters. And I think we specifically as designers, we know that this is key to our process, to allow different perspectives participate, to allow different perspectives to look at our matter and to impact what we are doing. So I already mentioned it. We as designers, we have a very special responsibility when it is about giving access to participate in creating services and creating products. And there's a quote I like very much by Jonathan Sharia and Cynthia Saucier, which says, we as designers, we have a critical role to play in the way technology will impact people's lives. So we ultimately hold the truth of how products are used, how they come in the hands of people, but also how they come into the hands of children. And what that process means of actually integrating children's rights in a design process and asking children to participate is something we are very keen on in designing for children's rights. And that's the second chapter of this short presentation. I'd like to talk a little bit more what we do in D4CR. So D4CR stands for Designing for Children's Rights, and we want to integrate children's rights and ethics into the design process. And we do that with a global community. We are organized all around the globe. Projects from UNICEF and the telecommunications company in Finland. Starting 2018, it was the first time that a lot of people came together in Helsinki to design a children's rights guide, which I will talk about in a second. And from there on, we did advocacy work all around the globe with different events, different chapters. There's local chapters in a few cities now around the globe. One of them is here in Berlin, where I'm situated. We also had online events during the Corona pandemic. And our main goal is to create a new normal, to bring children's rights in the design process and think about the children's best interests first. And how do we do that? So how might we help others make more ethical services and products for children? Therefore, we design brings down the children's rights that you just saw by the United Nations, but brings them into a format that we as designers can actually work with them. So that they give answers to us as designers what to consider when we design a product or service. The Children's Design Guide is structured in 10 principles. You can find them on the website. They're open source. They're constantly worked on. Everybody can participate in designing them. And they highlight something like everyone can use, give me room to explore and support my growth. I'll go into two of them in more detail now. So let's pick the first one, everyone can use. This is a principle that highlights the non-discrimination of children, their right not to be discriminated. For children. I have a few examples what it actually means in everyday life. So one example, and I won't highlight all of them because I think we don't have the time for all of them. But one example could be Toga Boca, which is a digital games company. They're also part of the D4CR network. And the way they see non-discrimination is by allowing every one of their users to create their characters as they want them to be. So their characters are really diverse in terms of age, race, ability, and every child at the end can find a character that they can relate to. So they allow for this really widespread, diverse community of people. Another example on the right side is maybe Lego. I guess everybody knows Lego. Considered building their products, their models with Lego bricks for people and children with disabilities. So they actually released guidance on how to build their models in Braille and in voice, so to help children that can't see to also build their products and build their models. And this is just two examples of how you integrate a diverse set and regard the diversity of children in your products. Another example, one of the principles we have helped me recognize and understand commercial activities. This is specifically more for online products and services. And that's, if you bring that back to the right of information. So children have the right to be informed about the activity that's happening online and with their data. And two examples maybe is Apple and YouTube, really big companies that had established business models, but they decided a few months ago, it's some time ago now, that they stopped doing targeted advertisement for products that are aimed towards children. YouTube, for example, videos that are specifically for children, you can't do any targeted advertisement there to protect the privacy and the data of the children, but also to protect them from the dark patterns that may arise. These are just two examples. Feel free to visit the D4CR website to find a bit more information and to also find the full guidance that we have for designers when it is. As I said, Designing for Children's Rights, the design guide is open source, and it's part of a growing community which is used worldwide. There's companies like Lego and IKEA, Togaboka, that use the guide and are part of the community. And they also take part in advocating the role of children's rights in design. So, but bringing that back to designing and the products that you may design, the services that you may design, how does this help, what I just talked about, how does this help in your work? So now you know about the United Nations Conventions of the Child, of the rights of the child. You know that there's and to look into that matter, I'd like to focus a little bit on what we are doing at Aumio. So Aumio is a startup, a mental health startup that I am a co-founder in, and it focuses on mindfulness and meditation for children to prevent mental health issues or struggles. And the reason why we founded Aumio was that in Germany, about 27% of children struggle with mental health. And if you look at that on a wider scale, that's 7 children in every classroom. This number is in different countries around the globe. It's slightly different, but there's always a case of children struggling from mental health issues, especially COVID is a time where that and I guess in other countries as well. So we decided that it's actually, there must be a way of helping children that struggle with mental health to give them a way of coping with their everyday, but also to prevent mental health in children that grow up and that may not have developed any symptoms. And we do that by using an app, which is around, it's all set up around the topic of space, of exploring your inner cosm. And it entails meditation and stories that help you learn about yourself, that help you use your breathing, use activities, use different storytelling techniques to cope with the everyday, to understand your feelings. Regarding D4CR. So we try to follow an ethical design process and to integrate children and families throughout the design process to get their voice heard. And we do that by thinking different from the very start. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the double diamond process. I suppose most of you are, so I'm not going to go into it in detail. But in the design process we use, we try to include the children and the parents from the very beginning, which means the discovery phase, where we go out and get ideas and to learn how the everyday of children looks like, up to the developing and delivering phase, where we have interviews with parents and children on how they use the app, how they integrate it, what their wishes are, what they and if you're not familiar, we can talk about it later a bit more about the double diamond process. It's a really helpful process to design your product when it's very strongly related to research. And yeah, so interesting in that process, and what I always find very important is that we as designers, we are no expert when we handle a new problem that we haven't heard about before. We are idealists. So we have an idea and we want to make that work, but very often we don't know how. And we need the voices and the insights of other people to figure out how to do that. Specifically when designing about a user group where we are not ourselves necessarily, like I'm not a child. It's very hard for me I could behave like I'm thinking like a child. I could think myself into a family setup, but at the end, it's not the same as integrating children into a design process. So I have an ideal, I have an idea on how to do something, how I want to do something, but at the end, I'm not the expert. The expert is the children themselves that need to come in and tell us how a product could look like, it should look like, what it should fulfill. We did that by integrating children into a co-creative process. So it's not just interviews that we also have workshops. Before Corona hit, we had multiple children coming to our office together with their parents in a very playful manner. And here, I think it's important, especially when we bring all the things together that I've mentioned before, the design guides, the guidance that is out there, the D4CR guide. How do you actually make sure that what you do is ethical, that what you do considers ethics? Because you need to think, if you integrate users in a process, they won't tell you what is right or what is wrong. They will help you, they will give you insights in how things are. They will give you different eyes and different hands that help you explore a topic, but they won't tell you what's right and what's ethical. And exactly that's where the guidance comes in. So guidance like the D4CR, Children's Design Guide, or the UN Child, they give you the guidance on design ethically. And the way you could do that, the way we did it in Aumio, is that we took the guidance that is out there and transferred them into our own principles. So we were reading, we were exploring the different guides, and then brought them back to the context that mattered for us. And I'd like to go through the 3 principles that we came up with in our design process that informs our design throughout, from the very beginning to the end. And it is something we always come back to, these 3 principles. And the first one is every child is different. And you already heard something similar before. It's this way of non-discrimination, like recognizing that every child is different and we don't want to discriminate. Recognizing that, making this a principle of our own process, of our own product design and service design, helps to always bring the focus back on this issue, that we don't want to discriminate. If we design something, we need to think it in multiple layers. We need to think that there's different users, different children of all kinds of ages, different nationalities, with different disabilities or abilities. And that's why we wrote down this principle, and it's on our wall in our office, and it guides us throughout. Another one is there is no normal. We wrote that one down specifically. It didn't come from the guidances that we researched, but it came from the knowledge that mental health still suffers a huge stigma in our society. And we wanted to fight that stigma and never fall into the trap of the stigma. So an unnormal child, pretty much everyone is normal, pretty much everyone is unnormal. And also children don't live by a guidebook. That's what this one says. And bringing that up on the table every time when we discuss and every time we design something, just always brings us in front of our eyes what we actually want to achieve. We want to fight the stigma that is there in mental health, specifically for children. And then the third one, the third principle that we have is everyone can play. And therefore we want to highlight something that we don't just want to be there for children, but for everyone, because everyone can play and everyone can find their old child inside. And it's also something that connects us. So it's pretty much a method that we're using to. And therefore, this is our third principle that we use every day in our design process, always come back on. And yeah, that helps us design Aumio and makes it the way it is. I mentioned these three principles to give you an insight on how the guidance that is out there, that is sometimes very abstracts or very high level, but how that can actually inform the work you're doing. You need to take that, you need to take it into your own words, into your own context, and then give it a chance to actually settle and impact your design. Create your own principles, always stick to those principles and keep them informed. Keep those principles in a way that they are in an ethical matter. So I'm almost at the end. But before I finish, I would like to share a few learnings in my work as a designer and user researcher with children. And also some recommendations of what you could do once you regard the principles and once you look into bringing the different guidance and different principles into your own work. The first one is participation. I think, and I mentioned it earlier, participation is a very important step in the design process. Not just when you design for children, it's always an important part, but specifically when designing for children, it brings a very different mindset and a very different way of thinking about certain issues to the table. And when you talk about children specifically, process, you can integrate them as users, which is maybe the easiest part. Children using your product or service, and you observe them how they use it. You can bring them in as testers in usability tests, for example. You can bring them in as informants, which is what we mostly did with the workshops at Aumio. It's when you bring them in to brainstorm, to create ideas, to sketch things out. They inform a huge chunk of the design process. Or you can bring them in as design partners. So they would be equal stakeholders to yourself, and you would consult them on a regular basis. We tried and do that in Aumio as well. It's the most challenging, the last one, because it requires you to engage over a longer period of time with the same families and the same children. And all of these ways of integrating children, it's I think when you do product design or service design, it's so easy to do it just as you want it, and it's difficult to bring someone in. And I completely share that experience as well. It's difficult in the beginning. I still remember our first workshop at Aumio. We were completely afraid, and we were super stressed before the families came to us, and everybody was running around, and we were worried that something doesn't work out, and we were more scared of the people that came to us. So it's stressful in the beginning, but you will really value the insights that you gain, because it's such a different perspective that comes to the table. And also, what you need to consider, if you bring people on board from the outside, particularly it doesn't work out, or things that turn out differently. And that's something, I think that's the second biggest learning. Allow for mistakes, allow for the chaos, learn from what you're doing, and say goodbye to the things that things always have to be perfect, especially when you work with other people. We're all human in that sense, and we learn from what we're doing, from the experiences we're doing. And particularly with children, it's so easy to think there's like one way that's right, but then you have children around you and everything just breaks apart. And that's okay if you take your learnings and if you learn from it. And then the third learning, I think, what I mentioned earlier, we are idealists. And I think I like this quote by Andy Warhol, which says, they always say, it's important in this whole process of bringing people on board from the outside, especially children, to have support in your company. If you work as a freelancer, you need a support from your clients. If you work in a company, you need supports of your team members, of your boss. And it's always good to find someone, even if it's just one other person, that supports your ideas and your ideals. And yeah, team up with that person, convince the other people. You're stronger when you're in a team, you're better than when you're in a team. And it's way easier to bring people on board when you are in a team and when you have multiple people working together. So that's already it. I hope that was insightful. It was a mix of my experiences in as in the role as a user researcher and designer that I made, where we tried to design a product and service with children based on the design guides. And it was also about sharing my key learnings, I think, in the last couple of years that I made when designing with children. Feel free to visit the website, which is Aumio and Children's Design Guide, or send me an email if you have questions that are past this event. I'll also share a little selection of websites that I find very useful. Take a screenshot here, Google those tools, and maybe they help you in your work as a designer, especially when you. So I'll finish the screen sharing. We have the last seconds to take a screenshot of that one, and then I'll jump right back into the chat and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Felix. It was really interesting, first of all. And secondly, from what I know, it seems we are really passionate about the, children's rights in design. So as far as I know you for a couple of years, and this is amazing, really, that you're taking care of this, all these principles and conventions and stuff like that. So thank you so much for explaining and give us lots of insights and information about the children's rights.
Thanks for listening.
Oh yeah. And to your the last slide, if I may, I will include these links later on YouTube, below the video, so people can read and find those links. Now I will ask, is that we don't have any questions in our Zoom chat. Does anybody wants to ask anything directly, Felix, right now? If so, just unmute yourself and and shout. Okay, I'll ask some questions, but if anybody has anything, just either write it in our chat or ask direct Felix. Yeah, first of all, you were talking about these conventions on the rights for the children and these principles. That is really interesting for me, and I'm really happy that I can find them on, I can Google it. But for me, I guess we can use them like for adults as well, right? Not only for children, because it seems to me like it can be used generally, not only for children, but it's really interesting to use them for like these principles and conventions. Am I right?
It's correct. I mean, there's the Human Rights Treaty, which is more general. But then the Children's Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, they take into account that children do have, there's a specific role and a specific, they call it the best interest of the child. In German, it's zum Wohle des Kindes. It's broader than the Human Rights Treaty. At the same time, and I think that's what I mentioned before, it's if you design for children, if you consider children's rights in the design process, the products you generate and the outcome you generate is also accessible or more accessible to anyone else. And I think that's in regards, for example, to name an example, in dark patterns, we are very prone to sometimes, as a designer, to fall in that trap of also using dark patterns in your designs. Different, I don't know, marketing schemes or UI elements that trigger you to click somewhere where you otherwise wouldn't have clicked. And if you consider that in our design, regarding like using a design guide like the D4CR guide for children, if you consider that and don't integrate it because of the children, it will also be relevant, of course, for other generations that are using the product. So yes, I think if you design with the Convention of the Rights of the Child in mind, or the D4CR guide in mind, you will also automatically design for other groups of people or older generations.
Yeah, I totally agree. Definitely. Yeah, as you mentioned regarding those, not only dark patterns, but also like we all know that social media, have also taken over young people's relationship and in constructing their reality and homework and weekend plans, and all within the system that is designed to capture and monetize, our attention. So, is there? Yeah, I know it's really hard to answer, but I'm not sure. But we still need to, as a designers, we need to try to build some kind of a healthier relationship with technology. But do you have any recommendations, or maybe some key aspects of, or anything like that, how we can be more human, I would say, and ethical?
I think first of all, it's about informing ourselves what is out there. Maybe I'm sure most of you haven't even heard of the Designing for Children's Rights Guide, because it's still something it's quite new. But listening outside, seeing what's there, what kind of guidance is there, things that support you when it's about ethical design, and informing yourself what ethical design actually means, what you need to consider. Because I think if you never look into that direction, you don't know what's there, and you don't know what could be considered morally just or not, or ethical or not. And so I think the first one is inform yourselves. Listen out there, be always informed about the latest trend in not just technology, but also society, how we interact as a society, what is accepted and what is not. And then consider that in your work. I think that's the first step. And then another step, I think, is to consider business. Peter, you just mentioned that there's always, at the end, you design a product and a service, and it's in a company, so there's some commercial interest behind it. And it doesn't have to be a conflict. That's something we looked into in Designing for Children's Rights, and I wouldn't say we have an answer yet. But very often as a designer, what you do, it's oriented towards a profit or commercial activities. But you can integrate rights and ethical design in a way that it's not conflicting with the interest of making a profit or a company. And I think a nice example is environmental issues. So there's this huge discussion. You do like your business, at least in Germany, there was the discussion, you do your business as usual and you make money, or you do environmental things and you don't make any money. And now they figured out, after decades of talking about that you can actually have a business model that is environmentally friendly, and you can save the environment and still make money of it and make a profit of it. And I think it's the same with children's rights. If you integrate in a certain way, they are not hindering a business model, they can enable different business models. And that's something that businesses need to consider, especially businesses that employ designers or user researchers in their process. Because only with the support of the company and with your boss, you can actually integrate children's rights and integrate participation in the process.
Yes, exactly.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah. So you can read it, or shall I read it for you? Yeah, we have a question like, what do you think about in-app purchases in apps which are focused on child user? Children are easy to target for microtransactions, and many apps that indirectly abuse this method.
Yeah, that's correct. I think you see that very often, especially in games, in-app purchases. A good example of how it can be different is, I forgot the name. I think it's Duolingo for Kids.
Yeah.
I had it on one of my slides as well. So they had different apps, and in those apps, they advertised the other apps. And partially that advertisement was towards children because children were using their products. So once they recognized that it's actually First of all, it's a confusing system because you have multiple apps and they're all linking to each other and advertising each other. But also it's a little bit abusive because you use children to market the other apps and then let them download them or ask them to get downloaded. So what they did, they changed actually their business model, and they decided to make a platform of one app where you can use different services and there's no advertisement in between them anymore. And that's an alternative business model that works, and that's less questionable than the one they had before. And I think it's the same if you have in-app purchases in apps targeted at children. It's something similar to when you have YouTube videos for children that use ads for other services. And YouTube stopped that process. So I think it's something that, yeah, that's not okay. I actually think there's mechanisms on how that's limited, especially if you use this family functionalities of Apple and Google. But we're still not there yet. I think it could be improved.
Great, thank you. I hope that the question was answered.
I hope so too.
Any other questions from the audience? Anybody wants to directly ask Felix? If not, I've got another one for you. You were also mentioning like you were running some workshops during kind of a discovery phase at the beginning with the children and their parents. And also I remember how you ran the workshops in one of our recent FINE projects in method, again with children. So how would you kind of include these children in the design process? Like, are you familiar with any toolkit, or can we use some, for example, the design thinking also for the kids, or and how to facilitate this kind of a workshop for children? Because I don't have any experience with that.
Yeah, so there's a huge field out there which is called play design, or just play. If you Google workshops regarding play methods, gaming methods, I think that's always relevant when you design with children in those workshops. And I think if you look into play and play design, they give you an idea of what you can do, or different methods you can use. I think what you also need to consider if you do the workshops, that your goal is not just to have a product which is ethical and considers children's rights, but also the process you're using is ethical and considers children's rights. And it also means the workshop that you're conducting follows children's rights and considers their rights. And that, for example, leads me to the one point that I think it's really important in a workshop with children to always be open what you're doing, to not hold back with information or try to avoid mentioning the company or that it's about a product. I think you should always communicate really openly and transparent because the children have the right to know what they're actually doing. They have the right to be informed. And this stretches through the whole process when you do a workshop with children. Be playful, include play methods, because that's usually where you get lots of creativity and lots of inspiration from. Give children their own space. Don't do everything like in a school task where you have to do one task 5 minutes and another task 5 minutes, but leave some space. Accept the fact that it's gonna be chaotic because it is gonna be chaotic. And there's a beauty in that chaos as well. Like if you embrace it and if you let children their time to explore and express their creativity, you will have something at the end that you wouldn't have considered maybe in the beginning. So don't make it too tight, the workshop format. Leave lots of space for play, and always follow the principles that you set yourself.
That's great. I think that I would recommend to every designer to try that kind of a workshop at least once in life, because we can learn a lot from children, I think. And you know,
and that's a good point. because my example was always regarding products for children. And actually, if you consider it, so many products we design for adults, but they're actually used by children. So almost all products, if you think about it, like a good example, a friend of mine, he's working in smart home setups. And he said, hey, if we replace like the light switch on the walls with a smartphone, what about children that are 4 years old because they don't have a smartphone? How are they going to turn on the light? And you don't consider that if you just think about this one target group of people who have a smartphone. But if you include children in the process of a product which is not aimed at children, you will actually also learn something.
That's a really great insight. Really, I would remember this. Do you have any questions? Anybody wants to ask anything? If not, I have the last question from my side. I'm finding it interesting. So it's really interesting topic. So I will, so yeah, let's imagine because our plan or our dream is also to kind of teach about UX and all these design processes in elementary schools and high schools. So hopefully one day it will be really like reality. And also it might affect also like the UX beginners. So what would you, or how would you teach them about the ethical design, and what would you recommend to these like people that are starting with UX or with children to kind of give them or set them some kind of a mindset at the beginning? What would you recommend? But maybe for us, we want to teach children this, like, what would you recommend to us?
That's a hard question because it sounds like I have the ultimate answer to it, but I don't. But I think as designers and UX designers and user research or design researchers, it's super important to listen and to really listen. So not just write down your notes and then follow that through, but actually listen in between the lines what people say. And from listening, I think the next step would be what I mentioned. It's about building your own ideals. Like, don't just do something because you have to do it, or it's your day-to-day business that you're doing, but create yourself an ideal and ask yourself, why do you do it, and how do you want to do it as a person individually? Which steps do you want to follow through? What do you consider right? And then write that down as your principles and follow through those principles. Don't neglect them because they don't fit at one point, but listen to them once you have your principles and your own ethics set up. Make sure that you follow through. So I think these are the two things I would give as an advice, like listen really carefully and like be empathic about what you hear and who you interact with. And then build your own principles on how you want to act and who you want to be.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, is there anybody wants to ask anything? The last question, Felix? I guess not. Everybody's muted. Okay then. So I think we can finish our session today for today. So I would really like to thank you, Felix, for your time.
Well, thanks for allowing me to speak here.
Yeah, and hopefully next time we will see you or meet you in person. So you're welcome to come to Košice anytime. And yeah, thank you so much for your time and for everything that you are doing and you've been doing for a couple of years, and for children and for for the whole UX community. Thank you so much, Felix. And thanks to our partners, and thanks everybody for coming. And hopefully we will meet you like all in person and offline next time in our next events. If you have any questions regarding the events or our UX community, please reach out through our social channels like Facebook or via email. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great evening and stay healthy and be playful.
Yeah. Thank you
Be
for
playful.
coming. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.